Hey everybody, welcome to today's roundtable discussion. I'm so excited and thrilled to have this group on with us today because I have learned so much from these folks, and I know that you all will be very interested in their tips and perspectives, and we have so much to talk about today. So thanks everybody for being here, our panelists and our attendees. And this is going to be a great conversation. So we'll just go ahead and get started. Just really briefly, I'll give some background about what brought us here today. And basically, we're all noticing, I think, on social media and in journalism and on the news, this whole concept around follow the science, trust the science. And there's this renewed passion from the public to understand the science, which is a good thing and a silver lining of the pandemic, but it has brought about a lot of fallacies and issues as well. And so I wanted this group to come on and talk about this because everyone here is doing some really brave work on the subject of helping others really understand what's going on since the pandemic began, and sharing alternative perspectives, and curating content to help broaden everyone's understanding of what's going on. And so we're going to talk today about this whole idea of following science, and how do you even do that? How do you do a good job at that? The idea of scientism, which is the excessive belief in the ability of science alone to explain the world around us. And then talk about how do you do research if you're just a regular person, regular meaning you're not a doctor, you're not a scientist, you're not a trained researcher. How do you make sense of everything? Because there's so many people saying things on both sides of the story. So how do you really muddle through all of that? So we're going to get to all of that today. And I'm just going to ask everybody to go around and briefly introduce themselves so the audience can get to know a little bit about you. And why don't we start with Luke?
Hi, I'm Luke Yamaguchi. I'm a functional nutritionist, health educator, and wellness consultant specializing in gut health. And in addition to that work, I also spend a considerable amount of time and energy advocating for medical freedom and informed consent, especially as pertains to legislation that seeks to make vaccinations mandatory.
Wonderful, thank you. Daniel?
I'm Daniel Chong. I'm a licensed naturopathic physician in Portland, Oregon. And just an interested human in how this world is unfolding before us, and just trying to play a positive role in it.
Wonderful, thank you. How about Chad?
Hi, I'm Dr. Chad Mcintyre. I'm an owner and clinic director at the Triad Upper Cervical Clinic in Kernersville, North Carolina. Very happy to be here today. Upper cervical chiropractic and spreading the word about its ability to help optimize the body's healing capacity is my professional focus. But one of my greatest passions is facilitating a change in the way that people think about health and healthcare. So I appreciate you having me, Tricia. Let's rock and roll, and at the very least, give some new things to think about.
Perfect, thank you. Christy?
Hi, yeah, thanks so much for putting this together, Tricia. I'm Christy Siriano. I am a board certified functional wellness coach. I specialize in helping women primarily who are struggling with exhaustion, autoimmune disease, thyroid disease, anxiety, depression, those types of chronic symptoms. I am also a former lawyer. So that is one of the things that may be relevant to this conversation is, in my former life, I did a lot of research and a lot of writing and a lot of working with experts and cross-examining experts. So I think, that has given me a little bit of a unique perspective on everything that's going on in the world right now.
Absolutely.
So I'm excited to be part of this conversation today.
Awesome, thank you. And I am a certified holistic health coach and a certified essential oil coach. I'm the founder of the event and group Healthy and Ready for Anything, as well as the page Science Unsettled. So that's who I am. And we'll just go ahead and dive in. So right now there's a movement, like I said, about following the science and trusting the science. I wonder what you all think about what's going on with this and this renewed passion for the excessive belief in science alone to understand what, to explain what's going on. And let's just start discussing that concept first. Do you think that this is the way to go, or do you see any fallacies with this approach? Why don't we start with Daniel?
I just started thinking as you were talking. I find it actually kind of ironic right now that we're at the point where we're discussing this topic, even though the notion of following the science hasn't even really been thoroughly applied, because there's lots of actual science. I agree that science isn't everything, but there's lots of actual science out there would be, if it was given its due attention, it would be potentially having a significant impact on how things are being communicated and what's being said out there about all of this. But it's being essentially censored. And so I'm actually just finding it ironic that we're already to the point that we're looking past the notion of trusting the science, partially because trusting the science right now literally just means trusting the narrative that you hear, the mainstream narrative. So that's kind of my perspective.
Yeah, that's a great point. How about Luke? What do you think?
Yeah, so if I can, I just want to give a few examples from the science of sort of flaws and asking this question, like, can we really rely on the science uncritically and just kind of accept it at face value? So I'll try and give a few different examples of this as we go through this roundtable discussion. And the first one I want to talk about is last year in May, there was a paper that was published on hydroxychloroquine, which has become a very kind of contentious issue. As a treatment for COVID-19, it was published in a very famous medical journal called Lancet. And the study purported to analyze data from 671 hospitals across 6 continents obtained by a little-known company called Surgisphere. And this study found that not only an absence of therapeutic benefit, but also potential harm with the use of hydroxychloroquine in hospitalized patients with COVID-19. So this was a bombshell when it came out. And after it was published, the World Health Organization in several countries suspended randomized controlled trials of hydroxychloroquine to treat COVID-19 because of fears that it might increase deaths. But then this study in the Lancet was retracted after it became clear that the data set used in the study was likely fabricated or fraudulent. And so interestingly, if we take a look at the financial conflicts of interest the study authors of the paper had, we see that the main author had received personal fees from a number of pharmaceutical companies, including Janssen, which is a subsidiary of Johnson & Johnson, who just had their COVID-19 vaccine authorized for emergency use in the United States. And another of the study authors had personal fees from a number of pharmaceutical companies that make vaccines, including AstraZeneca and Pfizer, who have also brought their COVID-19 vaccines to market. So that's something worth noting. And then along those same lines, similar to what happened in the Lancet, another paper on COVID-19 was published in the very prestigious New England Journal of Medicine, was also retracted because it too relied on unverified data from this same company, Surgisphere. So you literally had the #1 and #2 most prestigious medical journals in the world having to retract peer-reviewed papers they published, i.e. science, because they were based on fabricated and fraudulent data. And so I guess the moral of the story is, don't just believe everything you read, even if it's published in a medical journal. And I can give more examples as we go on.
Yeah, that's a great example. Thanks for bringing that up. And I think that's what makes it so hard for folks, is they'll say, well, someone shared this link and it's a well-respected publication, and okay, this is the science, and not really understanding, like you were saying, conflicts of interest, or perhaps how the study was designed, what questions were not asked, and all those sorts of things. It makes it much more difficult for people to wade through it. So as we go through more examples, I'm excited for people to have these examples of things they need to really think about and consider. Chad, how about you? What do you think?
Well, I think that what I'm about to say may sound weird to some, and it might land really well with others, but science, in a way that we've been discussing it over the past year, is in many ways a discussion about belief systems. And when you hear people talk about science, they're most frequently referring to modern medical science, which is based in laboratory science. It's not the same thing as biological science, which is based more on observing things that occur in nature repeatedly. To be clear, not really a whole lot in medical science translates to the laws of nature. And that's not said maliciously, but it's a reality. Experimentation and the development of theory after theory are the hallmarks of medical science, but never has that translated into a law, a fact that cannot be disputed. Lab science is full of great intentions, and it's produced some amazing innovations. But I think it's important to remember that it simultaneously uses the human body like a test tube, and it's responsible for a great many problems too. That kind of science is in some ways like a dog chasing its tail, one failed theory after another, the next one replacing the previous in a vicious cycle. People are often the collateral damage there. So that may be powerfully worded, what I just said, but it's also carefully worded. The pandemic has relied on a kind of scientific belief system that totally ignores many of the laws of nature. For instance, if we take the data of the number of tests and the number of positive cases at face value, we're talking about an infection rate of about 8%. And it's been that way since June. And I think that's important to note before the mask mandates and the eventual rollout of the vaccine. 8%. So if you study modern infectious disease history, 8% was actually fairly predictable. So what the science you hear so much about says is that we should be studying why the 8% get sick. And that's the entirety of the quote unquote scientific focus. But that's a philosophy based on a minority number. The most powerful number in that statistic is 92%. That being the 92% who don't get sick. Another philosophy would be to study why the 92% don't get sick instead of studying how the 8% do. So I think the greatest flaw in using that brand of science to understand the COVID issue and others is that that brand of science hasn't earned the right to be considered the one and only authority. That brand of science is the third leading cause of death in the United States. That brand of science wants to monopolize healthcare and has nearly succeeded, despite being like a sports franchise that makes a ton of money, but is defined as much, if not more so, by its losses than its wins. So there's good information to be gained from the science you hear most about, but it's not gospel. It just isn't. It's not a strong enough source of information to be held above all other opinions, especially the ones based on the logic and reason and understanding gained from biological scientific observation.
Yeah, absolutely. Those are some pretty powerful ideas there that everyone can dig into. And especially this idea around, instead of focusing all time, energy, and even money on understanding who's getting sick and why, and then, you know, what medications or other interventions they need, but really changing the mindset to some people are doing really well when they encounter microbes and pathogens and viruses. What are they doing right? So that's pretty powerful. Thank you. Christy, what do you think about all this?
Yeah, I have two thoughts. One, just to kind of add on to what Dr. Chad was saying, you know, and this is from someone who does not have a science background, right? I'm not a medical doctor. I'm not a scientist. And I think I can absolutely geek out on the science of the randomized controlled trials when I'm looking for information to help my clients. But I think right now, especially, we have this tendency to put science on this pedestal at the complete sacrifice of our common sense. You know, I don't need a randomized controlled trial to tell me that a stove is hot and I shouldn't touch it. I don't need a randomized controlled trial to tell me that I should look both ways before I cross a busy street. So I think, you know, while the science is absolutely important and very useful, incredibly useful to inform our perspective and our views and our understanding of the world, it is not the end all be all. It should not be put on a pedestal like it is the font of all knowledge and wisdom. And then the other thing that I would say is that, you know, I practiced law for 7 years. I tried over a dozen jury trials, and in every single case, there are competing experts, right? So one of my greatest pet peeves over the last year has been being told to trust the experts, because in any litigation, and it is equally true in the court of public opinion and public policy, there are two sides to every story, right? I would never go into a courtroom and expect to have the plaintiff present their case and present their experts, and then the jury and judge decide the case based on that information without hearing my case. That would never happen. And I would never expect them to reach a sound decision in that case without allowing me to cross-examine the opposing experts, right? You can hear the one side of the case and hear an expert witness testify, and they all sound pretty good, to be honest. Most of the time, all of the experts have amazing credentials, they have amazing education and experience. They've put together a report that sounds incredibly impressive, supporting their opinions until they are subjected to cross-examination. But if I've done my research and I've talked to my experts and I may know data and facts and information that they don't know, I can point those things out and I can show them that there are flaws in the data. There are flaws in their reasoning. There may be flaws in their conclusions. Sometimes those experts will even say, well, yes, I wasn't aware of those facts. And if I had factored those things into my analysis, I would have reached a different conclusion. And what's happening right now is that we're not being allowed to do that. We're being told this side gets to present their case, and we're going to accept that that is the gospel truth. And you don't get to present your case, and you don't even get to cross-examine that expert to question the basis for their conclusions, question their biases, question whether there are fallacies in their logic or their reasoning or their conclusions. We're just being told, no, trust the experts. And it is mind-boggling to me that this would never happen in a court of law, that we would never believe that a judge or jury could reach the right conclusion, have the best chance of reaching the right conclusion under those circumstances. And yet that's what we're doing as a matter of public policy for entire nations and the world. So that to me is the most concerning thing, that, not that my opinions on this are necessarily 100% correct all of the time, but that we are not even having a rigorous debate. We are not subjecting these experts on TV to cross-examination.
Yeah, that's a really important point to make. And I appreciate you bringing that lens, because I think a lot of people aren't thinking about it in that way. And perhaps that's out of a place of fear and, desperation to get back to normal. And they just want to say, the experts have it covered, and this is how we're going to get back to living normally and being able to hug each other and all of those things. But this is too important to just blindly follow one perspective or one narrative. And thinking of it in that way, I think, is really helpful. So thanks for bringing that up, that particular lens. And this reminds me of something that Luke said. Luke, when you were on the Against the Wind show with Dr. Paul Thomas recently, that was a great show, by the way. You said good science encourages debate. And I thought that was a pretty key concept, and especially since Dr. Thomas mentioned that you and he don't always necessarily agree on everything. And that's why it was so important that the two of you talk. Can you talk more about your thinking behind why debate is so critical?
Yeah, it's so important. That's what science is all about, is like, you propose, you have this study, it needs to be replicated by other people, and then it's accepted if it's able to be replicated. And then through this whole process, people are critiquing it, they're criticizing weak points, and then the science builds on that, it defends itself, it becomes stronger and stronger. And if you just have no open debate, it's like, how do you even have a democracy? We have like censorship in the place of debate. It's the worst thing I've ever seen in our country ever. And then people are like applauding for this censorship, saying like, no, there's only this one truth that comes from the authority or the expert, and we all just have to trust and have faith in that. And I don't buy that for a second. I think if you believe in science, you celebrate rigorous debate. That's how the whole process should work, in my opinion.
Yeah, absolutely. Daniel, I wanted to turn to you because you do an incredible job of, I would call it, curating content, and you post that for everyone, and you do a really good job of sort of moderating different perspectives and ideas, and you don't share it in a way of I have it all figured out and I'm letting y'all know. It's about asking good questions, and you follow a lot of different experts, because even though you're a doctor, you don't know everything about everything. And it's really helpful and inspiring and brave. Can you talk more about how you do that?
Sure. I would say that it's definitely morphed and evolved over this last year, out of apparent necessity. None of us knew what we were getting into at the beginning of this year. I think I'm the first to say what you just said. I don't know much about anything, actually, but I know a few things. And over this last year, the one thing that has driven me is just, concern for humanity, concern for my children. And that has just led me down this path of digging. And I'm, some would say I'm obsessive about it, but I just keep following my nose and looking at what people have to say, and trying my best to utilize resources that have at least, people that have at least some training or some qualifications, even though I've also learned that doesn't seem to matter at all in certain people's cases. But what I would say from a practical perspective, like really practical perspective, probably the most useful thing to me has been Twitter. There's a lot of, one thing I've done, I've made a point of doing is following as many different perspectives as I can, and being very wary and wary, feeling wary, and being very wary of echo chambers and boxing myself, even unknowingly into a situation where all I hear is what I'm also thinking. And so, I do post a lot of stuff, and I do my best to share things that are verifiable with either, whatever you want to call them, facts, data, actual research studies, etc., versus, random blog posts. And I've learned over time that, the people that I'm friends with on Facebook are very smart as well. And sometimes I'll get called out on things. My brother's very smart. He calls me out on things when I'm not being as diligent as I should be about the sources that I'm drawing my information from. But long story short, if I'm starting out a day and I'm feeling interested in sharing, looking at what's going on and sharing things, I'll go to Twitter and just scroll and read what people are. And again, I'm following a lot of scientists, a lot of data analysts, and what I've found, I would say that the last thing I'll say is the most common theme I've found is that typically people that have high level qualifications, the only time I will see anybody in that category share something that's outside of the narrative that we hear, the mainstream narrative, they're either retired or unusually brave. Like they either have nothing to lose or they don't care if they lose. Mm-hmm. And that's unfortunately a relatively small group of people, but it's played itself out time and time again. And I think that in and of itself is very telling as to how our world is operating these days. And you called me brave. I don't know if I'm brave. I mean, I don't really have I run my own business, so nobody can tell me what to do or not to do. And I'm not being negligent or, doing bad medicine, so, I guess I'm just risking people's opinions, but at some point, if you really care about what's happening in the world, you have to not be concerned about that.
Yeah, totally agree. And I think the more of us can see others who are also, sharing, alternative ideas and broader perspectives, the more that there will be a ripple effect, and more people will be willing to do it and willing to engage in those conversations. And I just think it's really important work, and I commend all of you for doing that. And I'm so grateful because I learn a lot from each and every one of you.
And I want to just add, I don't only just go to Twitter. Like I do dig into I use it a lot to find the studies. Like whenever I hear something that comes out, I want to actually look at the source. Yes. So I frequently will pull up, I get really irritated when I see like a news article that's talking about a new study or whatever, and they don't link the study.
Yes.
Because usually I just go right to that and go, okay, cool. I don't care what you say. I want to go and see what the actual study says. And so that's been, you know, and it's not easy. Not everybody's really able to do that, or has the time or interest, or, you know, experience in being able to analyze studies. But for the type of information that I try to then share on Facebook, I don't like to come from what the news says, because as we all know, it's not usually the entire picture. And so I do try to curate and explain things in my posts in a way that everybody would understand it, but it's all based on trying to analyze what's actually, you know, truly going on. And just hearing what Luke said at the beginning about those trials, I mean, I dug into all of that as well, and it's astounding when you look at the details versus look at what's being said, and there's such a different picture that gets painted.
Yeah, because the news, it's not a public service. I think there's a misconception sometimes, it's just changing, but that the news is a public service of some sort, and it's a business. And the news is changing quite rapidly. If you think about, you know, all the citizen journalism, and anybody can have their own news channel now, and social media, and it's changed so much, which I think we forget. And it's probably very difficult on their business model. And so, you know, the sensationalism and the politicization of everything is probably a reflection of this trend. But for us to keep in mind that the news is a business, and, you know, they have the people who pay their bills, and we got to, you know, take it all with that kind of grain of salt. The other thing I think that you mentioned that's pretty powerful is, you know, you said you assume you don't know it all, basically. You know, you're a doctor. Some doctors kind of assume that they know quite a bit and aren't always as open-minded, but you said, I don't know much. You know, obviously you know quite a bit, but you go at it as, I don't know, and I'm going to be open to understanding it and looking at different sources and, you know, reliable people who have, you know, different perspectives and opinions and how people are reading the data, and you're just so open to it. I think that's a key takeaway that everybody can learn from. So thank you for that. Chad, I wanted to ask you, because you do a lot to help educate people in your office, seeing patients every day. You do educational presentations in your office, I think on a monthly basis. You develop a newsletter, you make videos. And so you're doing a lot to try to take that science and, you know, pull out the golden nuggets, distill it down for people who don't feel like they can wade through the science, or they don't have the time or the interest to do it. So kind of taking off on Daniel's point about that, how do you go through the science and make it something that not only helps educate your patients, but inspires them to feel that they can be empowered and they can learn about this, and that, you know, they can use their brain, even if it's about health and science and that's not their field?
I guess it's just, honestly, it's just part of a goal that I think is really important for all of us who have the knowledge that we've been discussing thus far, the backgrounds that we have, to recognize that most people out there, they've not really been taught a whole lot about health and their bodies. And so they don't have that real foundation. And so my goal with the education that I provide is really to help people just learn the basics, to get grounded in the facts of life, if you will. So when it comes to just developing little courses or just giving people information that would help them grasp something as simple as, like, here's immune system 101 applied. Here's the nervous system 101 applied. I think if you have a foundational knowledge base about those things, and those things they're complicated, but you can break them down in ways that the layperson can totally get. And if you have that, then researching becomes a lot easier, because you're not flying blind. You know, if you fundamentally grasp the gravity, for instance, of what the immune system does every minute even, then it'll fundamentally alter the way that you receive research about vaccines, infectious disease, etc. That foundation, if you add that to a healthy understanding of just how much the vast majority of the research you see is based in a singular philosophy guilty of tunnel vision, that's going to get you to a good place to be able to receive all sorts of research. It's hard for a lot of the stuff out there to land with people, because, and I think it's why it's so easy for people to get into this headspace of just trust the science, is because they've got very little background that would allow them to really grasp some of the bigger picture stuff that could be going on. That's one of the things I saw so frequently over the past year in the event that I would engage people on social media, it was, wow, okay. So it really helped me. It really helped me further understand just how much ground we've got to cover in the patient education department, so to speak, so that when you're organizing research, when you're seeing this stuff come across your social media feeds, you have the ability to decipher, okay, this is the straight shooting type stuff that isn't very opinion based and is more just a recap of proposed facts. This is new information and a new perspective that I don't get the feeling from what I've observed over the past year that there are a lot of people out there in the general public that have got enough of a foundational health understanding to be able to decipher all that. So that's really my goal. My goal is to help people have a baseline understanding of their health so that when all this stuff starts coming through, they've got an ability to actually filter some of it.
Yeah, that's so important. And Christy, I think jumping off on that point, because you spend, as a health coach, you spend a lot of time one-on-one with people and in small groups, and have the opportunity to really dive through this with people and help them walk through and not telling them what to do, but empowering them to think more about it for themselves. And you also spend a lot of time advocating for greater compassion and empathy and tolerance. So can you just speak to your perspective on those things? Because you do such a good job of moving the ball forward instead of, it's not about complaining about what's wrong with healthcare or the system. It's about how do we move things forward and really put ourselves in a position to be in a healthier place, both physically and mentally. And I always really appreciate your perspective on that. So, what has your experience been with your tribe?
Yeah, I think that's all so many great points that Chad is raising. And I do think it starts with coming from a place of love and compassion in all of our interactions, right? We live in this society where people are so polarized, and for whatever reason, the science has become politicized and the pandemic has become politicized. And so we kind of automatically are already in our corners ready to box, right? Instead of coming from a place of understanding another person's perspective. And so, anytime I'm working with clients or with groups of women, that is my first goal, is to understand where they are and what their perspective is and where they're coming from. And I think that's where you have to start, is with those personal connections, right? Like so many of the things that we read on Facebook when we're sparring back and forth with people, you would never speak that way face to face with a client or a friend or a family member. So I think kind of taking a step back and approaching it from a place of love and compassion, that this is a friend that I want to communicate with, not to tell them they're wrong, but to broaden their perspective a bit, to share a little bit more. And Daniel, I love the humility with which you approach everything. I started following you a while ago on Facebook after Trisha had shared some of your posts. And, that is what I look for in people that I want to follow and learn from, is people who aren't saying, oh, I'm right about everything. Trust me, I'm the expert. I know everything. But the people who are saying, here's the world as I see it. What do you see? I could be wrong, share some information with me. And, I post things. I used to feel really, really self-conscious when I posted things, because again, I'm not a medical doctor. I'm not a scientist. I had to make sure that every single thing I said was exactly right. And I'd done all the research and read 1,000 studies and everything was 100% correct. And then I thought, no, I think the better way to approach this is in smaller nuggets of information, and to be very humble in our approach and say, this is what I believe to be true, and here's why. If you have a different perspective, I would love to hear it. Maybe I could learn something from you as well.
Yeah, so like the idea of seeking to understand versus seeking to be understood is pretty powerful and difficult to do, of course, but that might be a perspective that helps us all to come together and realize that, the fighting with each other and calling people out and all that is not actually productive. It's not going to help us all be healthier. It's not going to help us understand the world more. And we're kind of all in this together. And so I just love that perspective of how you invite people, you call people in versus calling them out, which I think is a pretty big idea. And if we could figure out how to all do that better, and for someone with a very different perspective, or someone who's coming at you saying, tell me more about why you feel that way, or what information are you looking at, and like, let's engage and let's have a discussion about that. So that's, I think, such a key idea. Thank you so much. And Luke, I did want to ask you about your course. If anybody doesn't know, Luke has developed a course about vaccine education, which I wanted to mention because it's just so well done. And people can walk through it for free at thedarksideofvaccines.com. And it's very unemotional, not political. There's no conflicts of interest or anything like that. It kind of strips all of that away and just walks people through some information. And Luke does it in such a way that, like Christy was saying, it's not about forcing one's point or proving oneself. It's about engaging people and like, let's start a conversation based on something a bit more neutral, and let's look at the science. And so, Luke, could you just talk about how did you decide what information to pull into that course? How did you make it so neutral and trying to look at science? How did you take the politics and all of the emotional triggers out of it?
Yeah, so the course is called The Dark Side of Vaccines, the less publicized story of vaccine safety and efficacy. And I have to say straight from the get-go, just as the title would suggest, it's not a balanced perspective. I'm not going over all the benefits of vaccines and all the risks, because I think the mainstream media does a very good job of just hammering us over the head with vaccines are safe and effective. And, that's basically all you need to know. It's the greatest miracle of modern medicine we've ever known, et cetera, et cetera. But I feel like this other side of the story has not really been told very much, at least it hasn't get out into the mainstream. And so, yeah, it is not balanced. It's not a balanced perspective, but it's a perspective that I think is sorely needed, perhaps maybe now more than ever. And so, I look at the science and I reference everything so that people can fact check everything I say. And there's links and to all the research. So yeah, it's a great resource. It's completely free of charge. I have no financial conflicts of interest to disclose in relation to that study. No one paid me to make it. No grant money from Pfizer or anybody. So feel free to check it out if you like.
Cool. And as we start getting more towards the end of this, I know everyone is a very, very busy schedule. I just wanted to ask if anyone has recommendations for listeners around good resources for when they're doing their research, tips, things to look out for, things that you would suggest. Perhaps it's, what questions do you ask yourself as you're looking through information to try to understand, is this reliable? Is this trustworthy? Is this accurate? Any of those kinds of takeaways that you have for listeners to help them do a good job on their own?
The first thing I look for, as I already said, is someone who does not say, I'm the expert, believe what I say. Someone who says, here's the information, do your own research and see what you think. To me, that is such a clear dichotomy, and I will never feel 100% confident in trusting someone who says, listen to me, I'm the expert, because to me, that is a huge red flag. Then, I think I posted on my Facebook, I don't know, earlier last year, a hierarchy of scientific research. And we talked a little bit about the science at the beginning of this, and there is, a hierarchy of which scientific research is most considered most trustworthy and most reliable. And at the very top of that pyramid are meta-analyses. And for me, again, as a non-science background person, that is a really easy way for me to dig in and say, here is all of these studies in this particular topic on masks or whatever the topic is. So that's where someone else, another scientist or researcher, has gone through all of the published research on a specific topic or a specific question and calculated basically the results of all of those trials to say, here's where the majority of the evidence lies, because there are always contradictory studies, right? Not every study comes out the same way. And they kind of go through and evaluate what the differences are in those studies, in the conclusions, what might have made the difference. So to me, that is really, really helpful to look for meta-analysis, and then to look for experts on different sides of the equation, right? I don't, as Daniel said, I don't like to just live in an echo chamber where I'm only reading people who share my already preconceived beliefs, right? I want to look at people who challenge my beliefs and see how they measure up. I may not agree with what they say. I may feel like they have financial conflicts of interest. I may feel like there are holes in their data. There may be information that they are not taking into consideration. But when I look at the range of experts, that helps me to weigh, where I fall along the continuum of any particular issue.
Yeah, I like what you said there about looking for people to challenge your beliefs, because if you can be challenged, then you'll know either you have a very strong position, or you know that your position might need a little bit of an update. And so that's a way for you to get stronger in your position and understanding. So that's a really key idea. Thank you.
I'll pipe in and I'll be like uber practical, and maybe this is not the best way to do this, but I just was literally listening, but also scrolling on my Twitter account and just looking at who. So basically between Twitter and YouTube, I thought I would just rattle off a few, just maybe 6 of my favorite
Awesome
people. Definitely there's a doctor named Reed Sheftall, Sheftall. He's got a YouTube page called Truth and Science. I appreciate a lot of his approach. He's super thorough, super smart, only talks about data, but in a very understandable way, and he's quite humble, and really asks a lot of questions and brings up, this or that, piece of information, and then like, what do you think this might mean, and so on and so forth. First, and so there's very little like fear mongering from one's perspective or another. So anyways, he's great. I'm sure everybody knows Zach Bush. I think he has an incredible perspective on all of this, and is also incredibly humble and not necessarily out there trying to say he knows everything. And I agree with it. Basically, I think he would agree that the only person that knows everything is nature. And so he just tries to, come from that perspective and understand things from there. I also really like the Dark Horse podcast with Brett Weinstein. He has some really interesting guests. And then more from I also, like I said, I try to have really as well balanced to look at everything as I can. And so from more what you might call the conventional or mainstream perspective, finding people who are brave and willing to speak out against what their colleagues might be saying, I think is really useful. And I think the things that they point out are particularly important to pay attention to, because they're in high level positions. They're incredibly well qualified, and they're still saying, make sure you pay attention to this, even if it's against what might be said on mainstream. So I really like Vinay Prasad, Prasad. His first name is Vinay on Twitter. And then also, amazingly, it still shocks me to realize that I'm one of the people I've been most impressed with is a former vice president at Pfizer, and that's Mike Yeadon, Yeadon, on Twitter. He's been very outspoken about a lot of these things and the development of these vaccines, et cetera. And if you're going to pay attention to anybody's perspective, somebody who literally was in the pot himself for so many years, I think is important. So hopefully that's helpful.
That's extremely helpful. Thank you so much. And if anybody has trouble finding these folks, if you're trying to look up them and find them and you're having trouble, just, when I post this video, comment below and I'll help to make sure you can find the
I have a
connections.
very official list here that I also have.
Yes. And I'll also help you all if you're having trouble finding connections to any of our panelists today. I'll make sure you find, their websites or their social media profiles. So if you have any trouble finding folks, let me know and I'll make sure you get connected. Anybody else want to chime in on that? Your research tips or questions you ask for self, resources?
I'll just chip in real quick and just say that there's a couple of things that I always ask myself when I'm doing any reading. One very simple question is, does what I'm about to read look like it's about to promote fear, which we've got more than enough of, or does it promote empowerment and hope? I'm looking for action steps for constructive contextualization, like Dr. Bush, like he was just talking about a moment ago, for hope. Another question I like to ask people in general about what is to be sort of the focal point of their research is, are you looking at things from the lens of trusting that your body can figure it out if you give it the necessary tools, or are you looking at things through the lens of fearing that it can't figure it out? Those types of questions usually inform what I'm looking for personally.
Oh, that's very helpful. Thank you. And so that, I think your point is interesting. Like before you even start to read, take a moment and think about your lens and your questions, and instead of just diving right in, I think can be pretty powerful. Thank you.
Can I just share like a couple quotes?
Definitely.
So one is attributed to Albert Einstein, and he says, "Unthinking respect for authority is the greatest enemy of the truth." And I love that quote. And
I'm stealing that.
Take it, Daniel. And I have one more quote. It's a little bit longer. I just want to read it off to you because I think it's so pertinent to this discussion of science and medicine and everything like that. It's by Dr. Marcia Angell. She was the first woman editor-in-chief of the New England Journal of Medicine, arguably the most prestigious medical journal in the world, and the author of a book titled The Truth About the Drug Companies, How They Deceive Us and What to Do About It. And she writes, "Conflicts of interest and biases exist in virtually every field of medicine, particularly those that rely heavily on drugs and devices. It is simply no longer possible to believe much of the clinical research that is published, or to rely on the judgment of trusted physicians or authoritative medical guidelines. I take no pleasure in this conclusion, which I reached slowly and reluctantly over my 2 decades as an editor of the New England Journal of Medicine." And that's coming straight from the horse's mouth.
Wow.
Can you say the name of that book again, Luke?
Yeah, her name is Marcia Angell, if I'm pronouncing it correctly. Her book is The Truth About the Drug Companies, How They Deceive Us and What to Do About It.
Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much. I can't thank you all enough for being here today. I think this will be extremely helpful to a lot of people, and I just really appreciate your voice in the conversation and your perspective. I just want to take an opportunity for the audience to hear how to stay connected with you, whether they want to follow you on social media or visit your website, join your email list, whatever is the best 1 or 2 ways for them to stay connected with you. I just wanted to give you the opportunity to say that now, and then I will post the links also.
I wanted to actually just say, number one, that I really appreciated everybody's perspectives here. You guys are awesome. Everything you had to say, I totally agree with. The bottom line message I want people to hear is what I tell my patients all the time, which is, as long as you're breathing, your body's trying to be healthy, and it's looking for an opportunity. And there's no messaging about that. There's no messaging about how powerful we are, how powerful our capacity to heal and be healthy is if given the right opportunity. And this modern world makes it harder and harder and harder each day, and takes away opportunities each day. And so I just want people to remember that. And as far as me, I have a website, drdanielchong.com. You can find me there, and you can search my name on Facebook.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Building on what Daniel just said, I'm going to share something that I share with every patient the first day that I meet them. And that's that you have about, on average, 75 trillion cells in your body that each do about 200,000 chemical reactions every split second. So literally an infinite number of things just took place inside the body. Let's learn how to tap into that and figure out how we can optimize what our body's capable of doing, because that's our role. Our role is to try to help assist in whatever way we can the body to do what it can do, because what it can do is absolutely incredible. You can reach me. My website's triaduppercervical.com, and I have a Facebook page for the office as well. It's just do a search on Facebook for Triad Upper Cervical Clinic, and you'll find me. I'm pretty active on there several times a week. So thank you,
Awesome.
Tricia, for having me. It's been great
Awesome.
connecting.
Thank you. Christy?
Yeah, thanks so much, Tricia. This has been amazing, and I'm so happy to connect with all of you. People can find me on my website, christysiriano.com, or search for me on Facebook. I'm Christy Pruto Siriano on Facebook with my maiden name, but there aren't too many Christy Sirianos. So
That's right. You've got it covered. All right. And Luke?
Yeah, so if people want to follow my health-related work, they can go to my website, gutresolution.com, where I have an online course on the gut microbiome they can check out. And then for my vaccine-related work, they can go to darksidevaccines.com. And if they click on the courses tab, they can take that free online course that we talked about earlier. And if people want to, they can subscribe to my newsletters on my website if they want to keep in touch with my work. I think my days on Facebook are numbered. I just posted an article from the news, literally a news article. Facebook deleted my post and restricted my account, so I couldn't post or comment for 24 hours, literally for sharing the news. So
Wow.
yeah, connect with me on my newsletter if you want to stay in touch.
And I'm on your Patreon. Is that something that's still active that you're going to be doing more with, or?
It's active right now. I've heard that they may be censoring some people as well, so I'm concerned about that. But for right now, it's still up as well. So yeah, if people want to support my work, they can do that.
Yep, I'm in there.
Thank you.
Okay,
Thank
cool.
you for your support.
Yeah, as far as my stuff goes, if people wanted to learn more, I started a Facebook page called Science Unsettled to lean into this type of conversation and these topics. And I also have a group on Facebook called Healthy and Ready for Anything. The idea behind that is, especially during a pandemic when people are feeling a lot of fear, perhaps anger, feeling like they're a sitting duck waiting to be attacked, we wanted to shift the perspective and talk about how to use the power of your body, which is beautifully and brilliantly made, to keep you healthy, and things you can do in a proactive way to build your immune system and your overall health, and just be in a more healthy mental mindset as well. And so there's a whole panel of about 16 doctors, nurses, health coaches who are giving their best ideas and tips. And if anybody wants to shift their mindset, just be in a more positive, empowering, inspired place, that's the place to go. And the website scienceunsettled.com is forthcoming. So thank you so much again, everybody. This has been an awesome conversation. This is the first of a series of roundtables. So look out for more discussions like these. And definitely want to stay in touch with all of you guys and perhaps have more of these types of conversations. So thanks so much for your time. And I really appreciate you.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Mhm.